Hello, hello. I'm just going to remove that. There we go. Hello. I cannot see who is in the room yet. I know there are people coming, so I'm going to give it a second just to let people join. I'm really hoping this is going to record today, so if you're watching this on catch up, could you pop a hashtag replay in the comments box below, just so I know who's here and who's been watching. Hello Sam, nice to see you. Thank you for being here. I can see eyeballs. It comes up on Facebook with little eyeballs at the top and I can see that they kind of roll through and we get a few, but I can't always see the names, so if I don't say hello to you, you know why. I know you're here, but don't necessarily know who you are all the time. So if you've watched this either on a catch up, on the replay, hashtag replay, if you're watching it live, just pop it in the box, I was here live, just so I know afterwards who is here. And like I said, I'm really hoping that this is going to record. Facebook is incredibly unpredictable with that. So it doesn't always record. Hopefully it will. If it doesn't, I can catch up on this stuff during the week with you at various other times. So today we're going to be here very briefly. I'm not going to keep you for very long because I know time is tight. I'm hoping I'm catching you in your lunch break. That was the kind of plan around the timings. But I'd like to just catch up with you, see how you're doing, see how you're getting on, and just see what comments you have. Hello. So if you have any questions whilst we're going through live, pop them in the box below and that will come up on the screen and I'll be able to see that as we go through. Equally, if you have any questions on the catch-up, please put them in the box. I'm really happy to either jump on here live or send you a voice note or answer your question in the text. And I'll do my best this week to answer as much as you have. So this week you have access to this group until Sunday. So really use me. If you've got any questions around core, pelvic floor, general strengthening, general body control and activation and pain, all these kind of things. If you have any questions about that, just let me know as we go through the week and I will do my very best to answer them, either, like I say, either in a live here or as we go through. I have got a few questions already for today that I'm going to cover, but I want to just very briefly touch on the notion of breathing and breath control and why this is really important in Pilates. It's the most confusing bit. I know it is. I was told last night by someone who's just joined a class of mine that it is the most confusing bit. When I should be breathing out, I'm breathing in and catching up and keeping up with the breath cycle can be really tricky. And I know that. And a few years ago, I've been teaching Pilates now since about 2004. A few years ago, I used to leave the breathing and the teaching of the breath control until I'd been working with people for a little while so that they could understand their bodies and their movement and their choreography and their recruitment first. And then we'd add in the breath, because the breath control comes really important as you go down the line. It's really great for control and recruitment, and it really helps to master some of the more advanced exercise repertoire. So it becomes really important, but what I've found and what I've noticed is that actually it's really worth confusing people a little bit at the beginning with the breath cycle, because the benefits of that really outweigh the negatives. The thing I see mostly with women that come and work with me is a real lack of understanding and confidence and ability to connect their core. It's the biggest stumbling block, and it accounts for so much that goes wrong. It accounts for these tight shoulders, the tight hips, the knee pain. It accounts for lower back issues, mobility issues, balance issues. And the reason why it happens is a few different reasons. It can be core trauma. It could be a pregnancy, a C-section, a vaginal birth where you've had trauma to your pelvic floor. It can be time, and just years have passed and we just haven't quite got back to restarting all these muscles that have just got a little bit lazy over time. So it can just be down to just inactivity and a lack of sort of understanding of where to start. But it translates into all these bigger problems. And what I found over the years is that when we start at the core, everything else kind of falls into place. You start here and gradually your back does less, so your tummy does more, your posture improves, so your shoulders drop, your mobility increases in other areas, because things like hip pain, you know, your hips are having to grip because your tummy's not. Your core's not doing its job, so that the hips start to seize up and get really tight. And often people think they're strong, but often when a muscle is tight, it's actually really weak. So we end up with all of these other problems happening around the body, but actually when we take it back to the fundamentals of core connection, that's where the key is. That's where the kind of the lock and key moment happens. So the breath cycle is important, because without the breath cycle, it's very hard to connect a underused and potentially weak core. It's also, using the breath, a really safe way of getting the core to connect. Often that I work with women who have abdominal separation, and that can be as a result of a pregnancy, you know, where your muscles have moved to the side as your bump has grown and they've just never quite gone back. Or it can be a reduction in muscle mass, which happens as we age. So once we're over about 40, our muscle mass reduces by about 1% every year, which is dramatic when you think of that over a 10, 20, 30 year span of time. Makes a huge difference. And as that reduces, everything just starts to get a little bit lax and lazy, and this separation can creep in. It happens in men too as they age, but particularly in women we get this separation. Now the separation isn't that important, doesn't really matter too much. What does matter is the tension underneath and between those two sides of the muscle. So the breath can really help to build up that tension. And not only can it help to reduce that separation by kind of knitting things back together, but it can also help with that tension down the linear alba section in the middle here, meaning that you're less likely to get this popping, you're less likely to get doming in the tummy or potential hernia. It's going to build up the strength around your centre, so you're less likely to be relying on your lower back and doing too much in your lower back. So that's why, to give you a very brief overview, why when I used to not teach breath at the beginning because it was confusing, why now I realise that actually that confusion kind of is outweighed by the benefits. The positives are so good that it's worth a little bit of confusion at the beginning. So if you're doing all of this stuff and thinking, oh my God, I'm breathing in when I should be breathing out and I've got it all wrong, don't worry. Don't ever think it. Pilates is just movement. All of what we're doing is just movement. You're not going to cause any damage. Nothing is going to get worse. You're in the right place, and gradually over time, things are just going to click into place. Your body's organizational systems will just start to figure out what you're asking them to do. Initially, you're going to find that you're constantly pulling your shoulders down. You're constantly having to remind yourself to breathe and connect. And oh God, I forgot to do it that time, and I just did a sit-up and I forgot to connect my tummy. All of these things are just going to take a bit of time. Your body moves in a really habitual pattern. Bodies are clever, and they will find the path of least resistance, which is often going to be towards pain, but they'll also find the habitual movement that suits your lifestyle the best. So if you're sitting at a desk all day, your hips are going to get tight because your body's going to say, well, we need these to be short so that we can sit up tall all day. So your body is finding a habitual pattern. Of course, then you go and do an abdominal exercise like a sit-up, like lying on your back in this position, and of course your hips are going to go, well, this is us, because we're used to doing this range. We like it here. So you're going to try and sit up, and your lower back's going to jam to the floor because your hips are trying to do the work for you. So all the time, everything we're doing in this week is trying to recalibrate and reorder and reorganize the body. And that's why the breath cycle can be really useful, because it really helps with focus. It helps to bring us back. And yes, it can be a little bit confusing, but actually that confusion brings you into your body. It makes you think about what you're doing, because these changes don't happen without a little bit of thought going into it and a little bit of this mind-body connection going on. We're not going to naturally change what's been coming for a long time, potentially years. We need to use a bit of thought. So if you're finding it a bit confusing, don't worry. Just go with it. Stick with it. Be uncomfortable. Be comfortable being uncomfortable. Be happy with the fact that it is confusing, but you can't do anything wrong. Just keep plodding on. Keep taking the next step. So your breath cycle from an anatomy perspective is really valuable. If you think of your core as a canister, you want to think of like a tin of beans. You've got your diaphragm sitting on the top here, and you've got your pelvic floor at the bottom here. And wrapped around that tin of beans, we have some back extensors, we have some waist, we have some obliques, we have 2 lines of rectus abdominals sitting across the front like this. This is your 6-pack muscles. They help you to do this movement, this kind of flexion. But deeper, we have some transverse muscles at the bottom here. And of course, pelvic floor at the bottom, at the very base. And what happens is, as your diaphragm lowers and you inhale, your pelvic floor drops like this, and your waistline slightly widens. But as you exhale and your diaphragm lifts, your pelvic floor lifts and your waistline naturally narrows. So using an exhale to connect your tummy, or using an exhale when you're adding load and you're vulnerable, or when you're doing something that's a bit challenging, will help you naturally to kick in your core and your pelvic floor. So when we're doing lots of work this week, and we're going to talk about pelvic floor tomorrow in a bit more detail, but just be sure, be comfortable, be confident that when you exhale, you are engaging your pelvic floor and your core muscles. Whether you know it or not, that's happening. But there is a caveat to that. To engage them, you have to release them. So the inhale is actually really important. And I'd advise you to do this a few times during your day. Certainly when you get to your mat, take 20-30 seconds just to take some inhale breaths, because you can't engage something that's already gripping. The biggest problem I find with women with pelvic floor issues is they're already gripping. Usually it's replicated with their shoulders. They usually live up here. They're tight through their pelvic floor. They might experience things like stress incontinence or constipation. They're really tight, they're really tense, and they can't feel it. They can't feel their pelvic floor, and that's because it's already engaged. So same as with the core. If you are gripping and your lower back is sore all the time and your hips are sore, there's a really good chance you're already holding on. If you find it hard to take a big breath, if you find it hard to expand those lungs, again, it's often because there's this gripping sensation happening and we're doing everything we can to hold ourselves up and lift ourselves nice and tall, but actually we need to let go. There's a few different ways you can do that. Lots of stretches in today's session, these side bends that we do. We could do some other stretches in a second, but making sure that to find a connection, you have to release the existing connection. So that's the basic anatomy of your core. Your pelvic floor is working whether you like it or not. It's going to be engaging if you're engaging the core. So when we're thinking about this breath cycle, we're thinking about the exhale to engage and tighten, the pelvic floor is naturally lifting. We can do pelvic floor squeezes, and I can show you, and I will show you tomorrow night, some ways of doing that and some ways to actively incorporate pelvic floor into your work. But if you're engaging core and you're doing it in the way that we're doing it this week, your pelvic floor is going to be working. You are going to notice changes to your pelvic floor, improvements to your pelvic floor. None of it is going to happen overnight. With pelvic floor, if you're experiencing problems, leakage, incontinence, pain, all of these things just take a little while to reverse. Might be a couple of months, but definitely in the next couple of months, if you keep doing what we're doing this week, you will notice improvements and you will notice change. And there is always time to change and reverse pelvic floor issues. Don't ever think that this is a midlife issue that you need to sit with. You don't. Same with pain. There's always options and things we can do. So the other reasons that we incorporate breath is flow. It's a really nice way to move and to make sure that we are moving at a good speed and a good amount of control. It's precise, it helps. With Pilates, everything we do is all about precision, so we go for bang for your buck. You're here for 15 minutes, so let's make sure we get absolutely the most out of it that we possibly can. So that precision with your breath is really useful. There are loads of ways of engaging the core. You don't have to always use an exhale breath, but it's precise, it's focused, it gets you there faster, and it gets you more results in less time. So why wouldn't we? Your exhale breath or your breathing can really help with the connection, as we've talked about, but also the other thing people tell me, and this is something I experienced myself, is its focus. So the lovely thing about Pilates is that we are on the mat and it's all about you for 15 minutes. You might look at your watch a couple of times in that time, but I very much doubt that the time that you're with me, you're thinking about anything else. And I think that's one of the nicest things about Pilates and about the breathing, is that it really takes you away from everything else. And I can't think of another point in my day where that happens. So if you don't get that, even if you're sitting down watching telly, how often are you picking up your phone and scrolling, or doing something else, or working at the same time? It's very rare that we just get lost in something. So giving ourselves that time on the mat, that focus of the breath, can really help to kind of ditch all the other things going on in our lives. So it's nice, just a nice outcome. So some of the questions I've had, just to move on because I don't want to keep you here for too much longer. As I said, I can see people coming in, but I can't see names. I'm now too far away, so I definitely can't see names. But hello if you're just joining. Pop a note in the comments if you're here. And also just let me know if you have any questions. Whilst I'm here live, I'm really happy to answer anything. So what questions do we have? One was the confusion, which I've already covered. The other one was I can't feel it. And we've basically covered that sometimes to find the connection, you have to find the release first of all. So often if you can't feel that connection, even when you're getting to the very end of that out breath, if you can't feel it, there's a chance you're already tight. So taking on some of the stretches that we've done today in today's session, your side bends, doing things to open the front of the belly, like child's pose is a really nice one. I'd advise wide knees. That's a much more comfortable position and is also a nice opener for the hips. But coming down into child's pose, you can have a cushion under your bottom if you need to, and just breathing and just really allowing the belly to drop. Just let it go. Again, same thing on hands and knees, allowing everything to drop. Not so that you're sinking down into the spine. You can still think of keeping everything else engaged, but you can just let the belly go like you're holding onto that heavy bowling ball, and you're just gonna let it hang out. We spend so much of our lives holding our tummies in, and we're actually taught to do that. So that's where you get this gripping sensation. And a strong core is not a tight core. It can't be. It needs to be tonic. It needs to move with you and adapt with you. Same with the pelvic floor. As you jump, it needs to switch on. As you cough and laugh and do all this stuff, it needs to switch on. Equally, when you sit on the toilet, it needs to let go. If you're experiencing painful intercourse, painful hips, painful pelvis, you really need to start thinking about letting that pelvic floor release. Again, we'll come back to that tomorrow night. But finding all these stretches, lying on your back and reaching out so that you stretch the front of this abdomen as well, reaching out through your legs, getting as much stretch and space and rotation and movement through your center as you can. We'll try and release all that so that you find a little bit more connection. But if that is you and you're struggling, let me know and I can give you some tips direct. And now I've written something else. Oh yes, I've written something else and I couldn't read it. Wrists. So 4-point kneeling. Today there's a little bit of work on hands and knees. And I do briefly go through it, but just to give you a bit of insight, the wrists become sore on hands and knees when you're dumping all of your weight down into the wrist. And you can see that in 4-point, this is quite a tight angle. It's quite a right angle there. So that's going to be quite hard on your wrists. So there's a couple of things you can do physically. You can roll over your mat or get a rolled up scarf or something to put underneath the palm of your hand just to raise it up, and you can see how that just opens that angle a little bit. You can also come up onto knuckles if we're here for a short amount of time, if that's comfortable for you. Bear in mind that that rises you up a little bit. So if you're doing a leg lift, it wouldn't be as high as if you're down here. Your leg would go a little bit higher then. Okay, so just be mindful of the changes that makes to your body's setup. But my personal preference is to address the shoulders. So what happens with the wrists is that the more you put weight down through here, the more you dump into the wrists, the more they have to take that weight. So if you can think of pressing the floor away and activating the upper back, that's going to really help. So you always push up, and that's going to help you to kind of share the load a little bit. But the other thing is, if you're then locked out through those arms and really rigid, again, the wrists are having to do a huge amount of work. Your shoulders should be able to move in this position. So draw them back and make sure your armpits are pulling back towards your waist. We do loads of work like this in my membership of strengthening these areas so that this happens naturally. So that we're not naturally using the neck and the traps, but instead using this upper back. And then you should always be able to wriggle your elbows. They don't need to be bent, but they should be soft. You can see my elbow, you can see them there, my elbows naturally lock out. They go sort of into like an inner angle. And lots of people I see do this. So you want to, if that's you, just take a softening. And actually that's me softening my elbow. It feels bent to me, but it's not. And actually when you look at your arms, you can just check that. Check that you're not locking, check that you're not bending, you're somewhere in between and nice and soft. And that means that these arms, your arms on hands and knees are going to be working really hard, and you're going to get loads of extra benefits for the tone and support and strength of your upper body as well. And it's not just going to be your wrists doing everything for you. So that's a kind of quick run through, but also just make sure your positioning is good. Remember, if you're too close to your knees, you can see how the shoulder is going to be further forward. And again, that's going to really increase that angle. Equally, you don't want to be so far forward here because your shoulders are going to come up around your neck and you're going to again end up with neck issues. So being mindful of your positioning is going to be really, really important. Making sure that you're just in good shape, that you're thinking about it all the time. Again, this doesn't give you much time to think about anything else. So always thinking about what you're doing, where you are in space, what should be working, what you can relax, what you should be engaging, and just really thinking about your body, giving yourself the time to do this. Over time, bear in mind, this is now. This isn't in a year's time, this isn't even in 6 months' time, or probably even 2 months' time. It's just at the beginning, getting yourself in the right positions and doing things really well at the beginning is going to make that progress happen much, much quicker. One of the ladies in the group this week said that from yesterday's session, her big outcome was that she realised how far she has to go. And I'd really encourage you to take it back a step and think about where you are today and where you're going to be tomorrow, and maybe where you're going to be in a week's time. But remember that every time you come to the mat, every time you make an adjustment, every time you think about your own body, and I don't need to be there to tell you, I don't need to tell you to pull your shoulders back, I'll remind you in the mat anyway, but no one needs to prod you or move you, you're safe. You can just be empowered to know this stuff about yourself, to do the best that you can do today. I did an entire lockdown of online workouts with people, and I can tell you now the difference between my members in real life classes, when we went back to classes in September just gone, the last September, so a year ago, the people that had been doing online classes, the difference between them and the people that hadn't was monumental. The difference in connection, in awareness, in proprioception, in strength. And that's not because I was there tapping them to tell them to move that leg or shift that shoulder. It's because they did it, and they did it consistently, and they figured this stuff out about their own bodies. They were pain-free, they moved well, they were strong, and honestly, you could have separated the groups into beginner class and an advanced class just through consistent small amounts of movement. It makes such a difference. So as we age, we need to be doing this regularly, this daily stuff. So see how you feel this week, 15 minutes a day. It's not a huge amount by anyone's standards. And actually, if you struggle to find 15 minutes, there's probably another issue that you need to be thinking about, that actually everyone should have 15 minutes for themselves. So see how you go this week. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's anything else, I'm just going to come forward. Sorry to come really close to the screen. And just check in the chat. So hi guys, nice to see you here. Thanks for joining live. Any questions, you can always pop them in the comments after this and I'll come back to them. I really hope this has been useful. I'm sorry to keep you for so long. Any questions, let me know, and I will see you again tomorrow at 6 for our next session all around pelvic floor, which will be, by the way, a maximum 60 minutes. I can't do longer than that, so I won't be rolling over, and I'll try and keep it to 45 if I can. All right guys, thanks so much for being here. Take care, and I will see you tomorrow.